Jeffrey Dahmer, born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was nicknamed the Milwaukee Monster. His life was filled with darkness and horror. During high school, Dahmer exhibited a reclusive personality, enjoying drinking and playing pranks at school, and gradually becoming aware of his homosexuality. Later, he dropped out of Ohio State University and was expelled from the military due to alcoholism, starting with the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, in June 1978, and continuing until 1991. He killed at least 17 people over a span of 13 years. His victims were primarily homosexual men and boys of color, with the youngest being only 14 years old. Dahmer's methods were extremely brutal. He not only raped and murdered his victims, but also dismembered their bodies, consumed parts of the remains, and created human specimens. His crimes shocked the entire United States, making him one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. Jeffrey Dahmer's life took a drastic turn after an inguinal hernia repair surgery in his childhood. Post-surgery, he seemed like a changed person. The once normal child began to walk down a dark path. He was keen on collecting roadkill, tearing apart animal flesh with his own hands, collecting bones, and dissolving corpses with chemical solvents. This behavior was not only chilling, but also reflected the distortion of his inner world. From then on, he stopped smiling, his eyes became dull, and his personality became increasingly introverted and reclusive, to the point where he never made any friends. At the age of 17, his parents' divorce dealt a heavy blow to Dahmer. He lived with his father, who was a chemical researcher, but after his father started dating, he rarely came home. At school, his grades were consistently poor, yet no one cared. During high school, Dahmer began to drink heavily, and after entering Ohio University, he basically stopped attending classes, eventually dropping out after 2 years. His father, in an attempt to teach him a lesson, sent him to the military, but due to his alcoholism, he was discharged within 2 years. From these experiences, it is evident that Dahmer showed signs of mental health issues at an early age, but no one around him truly paid attention. The unspeakable sexual orientation became a significant reason for Jeffrey Dahmer to refuse communication with others, and also a potential factor in his crimes. In the social environment of the time, homosexuality was not widely accepted, causing Dahmer to feel extremely troubled and lonely. He was unable to communicate his emotions and needs with others in a normal way, and the internal pressure kept accumulating. This feeling of being marginalized by society made him close himself off even more, increasing the gap with the outside world. He longed for intimate relationships but feared rejection and discrimination. This contradictory psychological state gradually distorted his values and behavior. To satisfy his desires, he embarked on a path of crime, seeking so-called love and companionship through extreme means. The struggle with his sexual orientation plunged him into an inescapable predicament, ultimately becoming a terrifying serial killer. In 1978, 18-year-old Dahmer had just graduated from high school and was in an unprecedented state of freedom. One day in June, he encountered Stephen Hicks, who wanted a ride while driving on the road. The young Hicks, 18 years old, was completely unguarded against Dahmer. Dahmer invited Hicks to stay at his home, and they drank a lot of alcohol together. Under the influence of alcohol, Dahmer's dark desires gradually expanded. When Hicks said he was in a hurry to leave for a concert, Dahmer suddenly became angry. He picked up a 10-pound dumbbell beside him and struck Hicks directly on the head. Once, twice, 3 times, until Hicks fell to the ground, unconscious. Dahmer then used the bar of the dumbbell to strangle Hicks, pressing tighter and tighter until Hicks stopped breathing. Afterward, he eagerly stripped the clothes off Hicks' corpse and began to masturbate over the body. In the dual pleasures of killing and masturbation, he experienced great satisfaction for the first time. However, he was still not satisfied. The next day, He dragged Hick's body to a small compartment and carried out the experiment he had longed for years, dismembering a human body. After dismembering the body in various ways, his curiosity and desire for dismemberment were finally satisfied. Dahmer buried the body parts in his backyard, but a few weeks later, the fear and guilt in his heart seemed to be replaced by a strange impulse. He dug up the remains, dissolved the body parts with acid, smashed the bones with a sledgehammer, and scattered them in the woods behind his home. Starting from 1987, Dahmer's desire to kill was like an uncontrollable demon. That year, he brought his second victim, Stephen Tomey, to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee from a bar. The next morning, Tomey's chest was crushed to pieces, but Dahmer claimed he didn't remember the murder process. He put Tomey's body in a suitcase and transported it back to his grandmother's house, where he dissected and crushed the bones in the same manner, even keeping Tomey's skull for 2 weeks before disposing of it. After that, Dahmer changed his killing strategy and began actively searching for his next victim. He lured 14-year-old James Dockstader to his grandmother's basement, promising to pay it off $50 to pose for a photo. During this process, he drugged Dockstader and strangled him to death, storing the body for a week before dismembering it. In 1988, he lured Richard Guerrero to his grandmother's basement with a promise of the $50 to spend the night with him. Afterward, he drugged Guerrero, strangled him, and dismembered him. That same year, he was also convicted for paying a 13-year-old boy to take nude photos and served a year in prison. In 1989, he met model Anthony Sears in a gay bar and lured him to his grandmother's basement, drugging and strangling him to death and keeping the victim's head and genitals. In 1990, Dahmer's killings entered a state of frenzy. He lured male prostitute Raymond Smith to his Oxford apartment for sexual activity at a price of $50, drugged and strangled the victim. Afterward, for the first time, he took photos with sexual implications of the victim before dismembering the body, placing Raymond Smith's and Anthony Sears' heads together in a metal filing cabinet. Then, he brought aspiring model Edward Smith back to the apartment, drugged and strangled him to death, but due to operational errors, failed to preserve any parts of Edward Smith's body. Later, he encountered dance student Ernest Miller outside a bookstore, lured him back to his apartment, and chose to slit his carotid artery to kill Miller, causing him to bleed out and die within minutes. He kept parts of the body and consumed them. Subsequently, he met David Courtney Thomas near the Grand Avenue shopping center, tricked the victim back to his home under the guise of hiring a nude model, and killed the victim in the same manner. Most of Dahmer's victims were young men in their 20s he met in gay bars, with a majority being people of color. He first subjected his victims to various abuses, then tortured and killed them, followed by necrophilia and dismemberment, even treating some organs as snacks. To cover up the smell of the corpses, he put the body parts into huge blue industrial plastic barrels and soaked them in acid. Neighbors occasionally smelled the stench and called the police, but the police still did nothing. Dahmer, who had never failed, became bolder and bolder. He even had a sudden idea to keep his victims as sexual slaves like mummies. He used a huge syringe to inject an acid solution for preserving corpses into the skulls of the deceased, sometimes starting the injection while the victims were still alive. In July 1991, Dahmer found 3 men and paid them to pose for nude photos. One of the men, Tracy Edwards, agreed and followed Dahmer back to his apartment. Dahmer handcuffed him and pointed a knife at his chest, telling Edwards that he was going to eat his heart. Edwards was terrified, but he did not give up hope of survival. While Dahmer was distracted by the 3rd installment of The Exorcist playing on television, Edwards slowly moved his body and finally found an opportunity to knock Dahmer to the ground before running out the unlocked front door. Edwards, with one wrist still handcuffed, wandered the streets of Milwaukee seeking help. When he finally stopped a police car, he led the police back to the serial killer's apartment. Upon arriving at Dahmer's apartment, the police noticed an open drawer containing photos of bodies at various stages of dismemberment. Dahmer attempted to flee when he saw the photos had been discovered, but the police quickly apprehended him and handcuffed him. Subsequently, the police conducted a comprehensive search of Dahmer's apartment. Inside the apartment, they discovered a chilling scene. The walls were covered with photos of body parts. 3 human heads were found in the refrigerator. A pot contained several pairs of rotten hands and genitals. 2 skulls were placed on a shelf, and some bottles were filled with male genitals. In Dahmer's bedroom, forensics found 3 complete decapitated human skeletons and 11 human skulls. A barrel filled with acidic liquid contained 3 human torsos in varying stages of decay. 3 human heads and some body parts were found in the refrigerator, and kitchen utensils had remnants of human tissue. Such a scene shocked even the forensics used to bloody scenes, who claimed it was the only time in his career he felt the presence of the devil. Veteran police also stated that this was one of the strangest murder cases they had witnessed, with both the degree of cruelty and the number of victims being unimaginable. Dahmer was immediately arrested, and his horrific crimes were finally exposed. His arrest shocked the entire United States, as people found it hard to imagine that such a terrible devil was hiding in what seemed to be a peaceful community. Dahmer's arrest sparked nationwide attention, and his trial became a focal point for the public. During the trial, Dahmer initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, attempting to excuse his crimes on this basis. As Dr. Holly Siff pointed out, choosing to use insanity as an excuse, Dahmer had the responsibility to prove the jurors, since 10 out of 12 must agree that he was insane at the time of the murders. However, as the trial progressed and evidence continued to emerge, the brutality and heinousness of Dahmer's crimes gradually became clear to all. In September 1991, Dahmer changed his defense to guilty but mentally ill. However, the jury was not swayed by his arguments. In court, the prosecutors presented the detailed process of Dahmer's crimes, including his brutal killings, dismemberment of bodies, consumption of body parts, and creation of human specimens, among other heinous acts. At the same time, the police provided a large amount of evidence found in Dahmer's apartment, such as photos of dismembered bodies, human heads and body parts in the refrigerator, and human torsos soaked in acidic liquid in barrels. This evidence made the jury deeply aware of the severity of Dahmer's crimes and his clear state of mind during the crimes. After a long trial, on January 30, 1992, Dahmer's trial entered the closing argument phase. On February 14 of the same year, the closing arguments were made. The next day, Dahmer was found to be sane and without mentality at the time of each murder. He was convicted of 16 counts of murder and sentenced to 16 consecutive life sentences. This verdict brought some comfort to the victims' families and the public, who believed that Dahmer had finally received his deserved punishment. However, Dahmer's horrific story did not end there. On November 28, 1994, he was beaten to death with a blunt object at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Christopher Scarver, who was believed to suffer from schizophrenia, attacked Dahmer with a 20-inch metal bar while cleaning the gym shower. Another inmate, Jesse Anderson, was also killed in the attack. According to Scarver, Dahmer did not make a sound during the assault. Dahmer's death sparked widespread controversy. Some people believed it was his deserved end, a realization of justice, while others worried that such violent behavior would lead to more violence. Regardless, Dahmer's life was filled with darkness and horror, and his crimes brought immense pain and trauma to the victims' families and society as a whole. His story has become one of the most shocking cases of serial killers in American history, reminding people to remain vigilant about the dark side of human nature and the serious consequences of society's neglect of mental health issues. Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes have brought indelible pain to the victims' families. They not only lost their loved ones, but also had to face the brutal treatment of their relatives. This pain is not only emotional, but also includes psychological and social impacts. Many victims' families fell into deep despair and grief after learning about the fate of their loved ones. Their lives were completely disrupted, and some even suffered from long-term depression and anxiety. For example, Tony Hughes' mother publicly stated that Ariana Grande's remarks reminded her of her son's suffering and caused her great distress. The victims' families had to bear not only the pain of losing their loved ones, but also the pressure of social attention and public opinion, making their wounds even harder to heal. Dahmer's case sparked widespread concern about criminal psychology. People began to think about what causes a person to become such a cruel serial killer. Looking at Dahmer's growth experience, factors such as childhood shadows, sexual orientation struggles, and unstable family environments may have significantly impacted his psychology. This has prompted psychologists and sociologists to delve into the mechanisms of criminal psychology formation to better prevent and intervene in criminal behavior. For example, research has pointed out that antisocial personality disorder may be an important factor leading to Dahmer's crimes. People like Dahmer often lack empathy and a sense of morality, being indifferent to social norms and the rights of others. Understanding these criminal psychological characteristics can help us better identify potential dangerous individuals and take corresponding preventive measures. Dahmer's case also led people to reflect on some issues existing in society. First, discrimination and non-acceptance of the homosexual community may be a potential factor leading to Dahmer's crimes. In the social environment at the time, homosexuals faced tremendous pressure and discrimination, making it difficult for them to express their emotions and needs normally. This feeling of being marginalized may have made Dahmer close himself off even more, eventually leading to a path of crime. Second, the inaction of the police has also caused strong dissatisfaction among people. During Dahmer's crime period, neighbors called the police multiple times, but the police did nothing, allowing Dahmer to continue his crimes and cause harm to more people. This reflects the dereliction of duty and inaction of the police at the time in handling similar cases, prompting people to think about how to strengthen the law enforcement capabilities and sense of responsibility of the police. Dahmer's crimes have been adapted into several film and television works, such as The Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. These works reproduce Dahmer's evil in an artistic form, allowing the audience to reflect on the darkness and distortion of human nature in shock. However, these works have also sparked some controversies. On the one hand, they use artistic means to show criminal psychology and social issues, which has a certain educational significance. On the other hand, due to hiring charismatic actors to play Dahmer, many people on the internet are currently whitewashing Dahmer, and even accounts of Dahmer fan clubs have appeared. This has caused strong dissatisfaction among the victims' families, who believe that this beautification of crime is a secondary harm to them. Dahmer's case has led people to deeply reflect on the dark side of human nature. An outwardly normal person with a demon inside makes people feel fear and confusion. People begin to think out how much evil is hidden in human nature and how to avoid these evil factors from being stimulated. At the same time, Dahmer's case also shows the kindness and justice in human nature. After Dahmer was arrested, the victims' families bravely stood up to seek justice for their loved ones. Many people in society also condemned Dahmer's crimes and called for stronger crackdowns on criminal behavior and increased attention to mental health issues. This shows that there is not only a dark side to human nature, but also a side of kindness and justice. We should inspire the kindness and justice in people's hearts through education and social guidance, suppress evil factors, and work together to create a better society. Jeffrey Dahmer's life was undoubtedly a tragedy filled with darkness and horror. His criminal behavior brought endless pain to the victims' families and a great shock to the entire society. From Dahmer's life trajectory, we can see the intertwined effects of various factors, such as childhood shadows, sexual orientation struggles, and social environment. Inguinal hernia surgery and parental divorce during childhood led him to become reclusive and distorted. The non-acceptance sexual orientation led him to loneliness and confusion, eventually leading to a path of crime. Discrimination against the homosexual community and police inaction also contributed to his criminal behavior to some extent. Dahmer's case has led to profound reflections on multiple aspects. For the victims' families, their pain reminds us to pay more attention to the impact of criminal behavior on families and provide them with sufficient support and care. At the societal level, we need to strengthen research on criminal psychology and improve the ability to identify and intervene with potential dangerous individuals. At the same time, we should also reflect on the discrimination in society and strive to create a more inclusive and equal social environment. For the police, Dahmer's case is a wake-up call to strengthen law enforcement capabilities and a sense of responsibility, handle the public's alarms in a timely manner, and protect people's lives. In reflecting on human nature, Dahmer's story shows the complexity of human nature. Although there is a dark side to human nature, we should not ignore the power of kindness and justice. Through education and social guidance, we can inspire the kindness and justice in people's hearts and jointly resist evil factors. Although Dahmer's case has been over for many years, its impact is still far-reaching. It reminds us to remain vigilant about the dark side of human nature, pay attention to social issues, and strengthen the emphasis on mental health. We must work together to create a safer, more harmonious, and better society.